The blood-red sun dipped below the horizon as Grace Everett stood at the edge of town, a single valise clutched in her trembling hand, the word "banished" still ringing in her ears from the kangaroo court that had convened just hours before. The year was 1876, and Copper Creek, Arizona Territory, had just expelled its most outspoken citizen. Grace had been the town's schoolteacher, respected for her education and dedication to her students, until she dared to speak against the powerful mining company that was poisoning their water supply. Her evidence was irrefutable: dead fish floating in the creek, children falling ill with mysterious ailments, the strange metallic taste that lingered on everyone's tongue. But the Copper Creek Mining Corporation owned the sheriff, the mayor, and the newspaper. They owned everything but Grace's conscience, radical ideas, they had called her concerns, dangerous falsehoods meant to incite panic and devalue our prosperity. The town had gathered to watch her public humiliation, standing in silence as she was stripped of her position and ordered to leave by sunrise. No one stepped forward to defend her, not even those whose children had recovered under her care when she recognized the symptoms of copper poisoning and created her own remedies. The dirt road stretched before her into the darkening desert, leading nowhere she knew to call home. With only $30 to her name and nowhere to go, Grace took a deep breath and placed one foot in front of the other. The first step of exile. She had walked for hours when she heard the rumble of approaching hooves. Fear seized her had they sent someone to ensure she never spoke her truths again. Grace scrambled off the road, ducking behind a cluster of sagebrush. The moon illuminated a lone rider atop a palomino horse, his silhouette sharp against the star-filled sky. "I know you're there," the man called, his voice carrying across the desert night. "No need to hide, I mean no harm." Grace remained silent, her heart hammering against her ribs. "The name's Quinn Prescott," he continued, dismounting with a fluid grace that spoke of a lifetime in the saddle. "Most call me Quinn. I was passing through Copper Creek today, heard what happened at that farce of a trial." She stepped from her hiding place, still clutching her valise. "Come to gloat, Mr. Prescott, or perhaps finish what they started." In the moonlight, she could see him clearly now, tall and broad-shouldered, with a face weathered by sun and wind. He wasn't carrying a shotgun or a warrant, just a canteen which he offered to her. "Actually, I came to tell you that you're right." Grace blinked, unsure if she had heard him correctly. "Pardon me, about the mining company, the poisoned water." Quinn removed his hat, revealing dark hair streaked with silver at the temples. "I've seen it before in other towns. The company moves in, promises prosperity, then destroys everything and moves on when the damage is done." Grace accepted the canteen, their fingers brushing. "You believe me. Your truth is my compass, Miss Everett. I've been tracking the Copper Creek Mining Corporation for 3 years now. They ruined my family's ranch in Colorado. The water turned rust red, the cattle died, and when my father spoke up, he met with an unfortunate accident." Grace took a long drink of water, studying him. "Why help me?" "Because you had the courage to stand up when no one else would," Quinn replied, his eyes reflecting the starlight. "And because I could use someone who knows exactly what we're fighting against. I'm part of a group gathering evidence against the mining company. Lawyers in Denver are building a case, but we need witnesses, documentation." He gestured to her valise. "I'm guessing you've got plenty of both." Grace hesitated. Trust had become a luxury she could no longer afford. "How do I know you're not working for them? This could be a trap." Quinn reached into his vest and pulled out a faded photograph. "My father, 3 days before they found him at the bottom of a mine shaft. The company called it a tragic misstep." His voice was steady, but Grace could hear the undertone of grief and rage. "I'm not asking you to trust me, Miss Everett. I'm asking you to help me stop them from doing this to another town, another family." Grace looked down at the photograph, a proud man standing before a modest ranch house, his resemblance to Quinn unmistakable. She thought of her students, their pale faces and persistent coughs, and the townspeople who had turned their backs on her out of fear. "Where are we headed?" she asked finally. Relief flickered across Quinn's face. "There's a settlement about 20 miles north. People there aren't friendly to the mining company. We can rest, get supplies, then make our way to Tucson. Our contact there has connections with the territorial governor." Quinn helped her onto his horse, mounting behind her with practiced ease. The solid warmth of him against her back was strangely comforting in the vast darkness of the desert night. "I should warn you," Grace said as they set off. "They've probably already branded me a hysterical spinster spreading dangerous lies." She felt rather than saw his smile. "Then we're well matched. They call me a vengeful troublemaker with a personal vendetta. Are you vengeful?" His arms tightened slightly around her waist as he guided the horse. "I prefer the term justice-seeking. What about you, Miss Everett? Are you hysterical?" "Only when provoked by corruption and willful ignorance." Quinn chuckled, a deep rumble she could feel against her shoulder blades. "Then I believe this is the beginning of a formidable partnership." As they rode through the moonlit desert, Grace felt something she hadn't experienced since arriving in Copper Creek 3 years ago: hope. And perhaps something else, something warmer, blooming dangerously in her chest. The settlement Quinn spoke of turned out to be little more than a trading post with a few scattered dwellings, but to Grace's exhausted eyes, it looked like salvation. The sun was beginning to rise as they approached, casting long shadows across the dusty ground. "Gunderson's trading post," Quinn explained, helping her dismount. "Old Harold Gunderson has no love for mining companies, lost his brother to a cave and covered up as worker negligence." Grace smoothed her travel-worn dress, suddenly aware of her disheveled appearance. "I must look a fright." "You look like someone who stood her ground," Quinn replied simply. "That's nothing to be ashamed of." The trading post was already bustling despite the early hour. Harold Gunderson, a bear of a man with a shock of white hair and a booming voice, greeted Quinn like an old friend. "Prescott. Didn't expect to see you back so soon. Find what you were looking for in Copper Creek. Found something better," Quinn said, gesturing to Grace. "Miss Grace Everett, recently relieved of her teaching position for daring to suggest that poisoning children might be bad for business." Harold's bushy eyebrows shot up. "The school teacher heard about you from a peddler yesterday, said you were causing quite a stir, accusing the respectable gentleman of Copper Creek mining of some mighty serious offenses." Grace lifted her chin. "Not accusations, Mr. Gunderson, facts. I have water samples, medical records, and a detailed journal documenting the decline in health among the townspeople since the mining operations expanded last spring." Harold studied her for a long moment, then broke into a wide grin. "Well, ain't you a breath of fresh air? Come on back, both of you. The missus just made breakfast, and you look like you could use a hot meal and a place to rest." The Gundersons' home behind the trading post was small but comfortable, filled with the aroma of fresh bread and coffee. Ingrid Gunderson, a plump woman with kind eyes and flour-dusted hands, took one look at Grace and immediately set about mothering her. "You poor dear, riding all night in that dress. Come along, I have some things that might fit you. Not fashionable, mind you, but practical for traveling." Grace found herself ushered into a small bedroom where Ingrid laid out a riding skirt, a sturdy blouse, and a wide-brimmed hat. "These belong to our daughter. She's in San Francisco now, married to a banker. Would rather die than wear practical clothes these days." Ingrid's eyes sparkled with pride. "I couldn't possibly." "Nonsense. Consider it my contribution to your cause. Harold told me what those mining brutes did to the creek in Copper Creek. Same thing they tried here until the men ran them off at gunpoint." Grace changed into the offered clothes, marveling at the freedom of movement the split riding skirt allowed. When she emerged, Quinn was deep in conversation with Harold at the kitchen table, maps spread between them. "Would cut 2 days off the journey," Harold was saying, tracing a route with his finger. He glanced up as Grace entered and his sentence trailed off. Quinn turned, and for a moment, he simply stared. The practical clothes transformed Grace from a proper schoolteacher to something altogether different, a woman ready for the wilderness, determined and unbowed. "Miss Everett," Quinn finally said, clearing his throat, "those clothes suit you." "Thank you, Mr. Prescott. I find them quite liberating." Ingrid set a plate of eggs, bacon, and fresh bread before Grace. "Eat up now. You'll need your strength." Over breakfast, Quinn and Harold discussed the safest route to Tucson, avoiding main roads where the mining company might have posted lookouts. Grace listened intently, adding her own observations about the company's reach. "They have connections with the stagecoach lines," she noted. "The station manager in Copper Creek reports unusual passengers to them." That's how they knew about the government inspector who was coming through last month. By the time he arrived, everything was spotless. Quinn nodded grimly. "They're thorough, I'll give them that, but they can't control every trail and path. What exactly is your plan once we reach Tucson?" Grace asked, spreading jam on a slice of bread. "My contact there is a former judge named William Garrett. He's been building a case against the company for years, but hasn't had enough solid evidence or first-hand witnesses willing to testify. With your documentation and testimony, we might finally have enough to bring formal charges. And if we don't," Quinn's expression hardened, "then we take the fight to Denver or all the way to Washington if necessary." The determination in his voice sent a shiver down Grace's spine. This wasn't just about justice for him, it was personal, a mission born of loss and grief. "You should rest before you set out," Ingrid suggested, refilling their coffee cups. "Both of you look dead on your feet." Grace hadn't realized how exhausted she was until the possibility of rest was mentioned. The events of the past 24 hours crashed over her like a wave, and suddenly she could barely keep her eyes open. "Just for a few hours," Quinn agreed. "We should move on by midday." Ingrid showed Grace to a small but clean bedroom where she collapsed onto the bed without even removing her boots. Sleep claimed her instantly, deep and dreamless. When she woke, the sun was high in the sky. For a disorienting moment, Grace thought she was back in her small house in Copper Creek, until the unfamiliar ceiling above her brought reality rushing back. She sat up, smoothing her hair and straightening her borrowed clothes. Outside the bedroom, she found Quinn in the trading post, selecting supplies with Harold's assistance. He had shed his trail-worn coat for a clean one, and his dark hair was damp as though recently washed. "Ah, there she is," Harold boomed. "Feeling better after your rest, Miss Everett?" "Much better, thank you. You've both been so kind." "Kindness is in short supply these days," Ingrid said, emerging from the back with a bundle wrapped in oilcloth. "Some food for the journey, and this." She handed Grace a small revolver. "Because good intentions don't stop bullets." Grace stared at the weapon, its weight unfamiliar in her hand. "I've never fired a gun." "No time like the present to learn," Quinn said. "We can practice along the way." An hour later, they were ready to depart. Quinn had acquired a second horse for Grace, a steady mare with intelligent eyes. The Gundersons refused payment for their hospitality or the supplies, asking only that they be informed of the outcome of their mission. "Give 'em hell," Harold said by way of farewell, clasping Quinn's hand. "Those mining vultures have ruined enough lives." As they rode away from the trading post, Grace felt a curious mixture of trepidation and excitement. She had left Copper Creek in disgrace, banished for speaking truth, yet somehow found herself on a path that might lead to vindication. "You're quiet," Quinn observed as they followed a narrow trail through a stand of cottonwoods. "I'm wondering if this is madness," Grace admitted. "Two people against a powerful corporation with friends in high places." Quinn's expression softened. "Every great change starts with just a few determined souls, Miss Everett." "Grace," she said impulsively, "if we're to be partners in this madness, you might as well use my given name." He smiled, the first genuine smile she'd seen from him, transforming his face from stern to strikingly handsome. "Grace it is, and I'm Quinn." They rode in companionable silence for a while, the rhythm of the horses' hooves a soothing counterpoint to the wild tangle of thoughts in Grace's mind. She studied Quinn surreptitiously as he led the way, noting the straight line of his shoulders, the confident way he sat his horse, the occasional vigilant scan of their surroundings. "How did you become a cowboy?" she asked eventually. "You speak like an educated man." Quinn chuckled. "My mother insisted I get proper schooling, even on a remote ranch. She was from Boston originally, came west as a new bride, never quite shed her belief in the power of education." He glanced back at her. "What about you? How does a clearly educated woman end up teaching in a dusty mining town?" "Necessity," Grace replied. "My father was a professor at a women's college in Philadelphia. When he died, I discovered he had left nothing but debts. I had my teaching certificate and a desperate need for employment. Copper Creek was hiring. No family to turn to," she shook her head. "My mother died when I was young. No siblings. What about your family? You mentioned your father, but—" "My mother passed 5 years ago, consumption. My younger brother runs what's left of our ranch in Colorado now. It's much smaller since the water problems, but he manages." Pride colored Quinn's voice. He wanted to join this fight, but someone needed to keep the home fires burning. "You're fortunate to have him." Quinn nodded, his expression distant. "I write when I can, though letters are sporadic at best out here." The trail narrowed, forcing them to ride single file. Grace found herself studying the landscape so different from the lush greenery of Pennsylvania, where she had grown up. The desert had a stark beauty all its own, with red rock formations jutting dramatically against the endless blue sky and unexpected bursts of color from wildflowers and cacti. By late afternoon, they had covered considerable ground. Quinn led them to a small canyon where a spring bubbled up between rocks, creating a pocket of green in the arid landscape. "We'll camp here for the night," he said, dismounting and helping Grace from her horse. "It's sheltered, has water, and the approach is easily defended." "Are you expecting trouble?" Grace asked, stretching her stiff muscles. She was unaccustomed to riding for so long, and her body protested with various aches and pains. "I always expect trouble," Quinn replied matter-of-factly. "That's how I've stayed alive this long." They set up camp with efficient movements, Quinn building a small fire while Grace arranged their bedrolls on opposite sides of the flames. The domesticity of the tasks felt oddly comfortable, as though they had been traveling companions for years rather than a single day. As twilight descended, they shared a simple meal of jerky, hard bread, and dried fruit from their supplies. Grace opened her valise and pulled out a leather-bound journal. "This contains all my observations and evidence from Copper Creek," she explained, handing it to Quinn. "Water testing results, medical notes, dates of mining expansion correlated with illness outbreaks. I also have letters from parents thanking me for identifying their children's symptoms when the company doctor insisted it was just common colds." Quinn leafed through the pages, his expression growing grimmer with each turn. "This is meticulous work, Grace. How long have you been documenting this?" "Since about 3 months after I arrived. At first, I thought the children's illnesses were just part of living in a new place, my body adjusting to the local conditions. But then I noticed patterns. The same symptoms appearing in families who used water from certain sections of the creek. The company workers who only drank from their own well staying healthy while townspeople fell ill." She pointed to a detailed map she had drawn. "I started testing water samples using methods I learned from my father's chemistry books. The contamination increased dramatically after they opened the new shaft last year." Quinn studied her with newfound respect. "And you confronted them with this evidence?" "I tried going through proper channels first. The town doctor, the mayor. They dismissed me as a hysterical female who didn't understand the complexities of progress." Grace's voice hardened. "When children started showing signs of permanent damage, tremors, memory problems, I could no longer stay silent. I presented my findings at a town meeting." The next day, I was summoned to court on charges of spreading dangerous falsehoods harmful to public morale and the town's economic interests. Brave, Quinn murmured. Foolish, perhaps, but brave. Truth shouldn't require courage, Grace said, gazing into the fire. It should simply be the expected standard. Quinn closed the journal carefully. In a just world, perhaps, but we don't live in that world yet. Yet, Grace repeated, finding comfort in that single word and the promise it held. The fire crackled between them, casting dancing shadows across the canyon walls. In the distance, a coyote howled, the sound echoing mournfully. We should get some rest, Quinn said finally. We have a long ride tomorrow. Grace nodded, suddenly aware of how intimate their situation was, alone in the wilderness, far from civilization, sharing this small circle of firelight. Quinn must have sensed her discomfort, for he added gently, "You're safe with me, Grace. You have my word." "I know," she replied, surprised to realize it was true. Despite knowing him for barely a day, she trusted Quinn Prescott in a way she had trusted few people in her life. There was a steadiness to him, an unwavering moral clarity that resonated with her own. As she settled into her bedroll, Grace watched Quinn staring into the flames, his profile strong against the darkness. What drove a man to dedicate years of his life to fighting an enemy as powerful as Copper Creek mining? The loss of his father, yes, but there seemed to be more, a fundamental belief in justice that mirrored her own. "Quinn," she said softly. He looked up, eyebrows raised in question. "Thank you for believing me when no one else would." A smile touched the corner of his mouth. "Get some sleep, Grace. Tomorrow we continue the fight." She closed her eyes, the exhaustion of the past days finally claiming her. Her last conscious thought was that despite everything, the banishment, the uncertainty, the danger, she felt more alive than she had in years. The next morning dawned clear and cool. Grace woke to find Quinn already up, tending to the horses and preparing a simple breakfast of coffee and hardtack. The domestic scene stirred something unexpected within her, a longing for normalcy she hadn't realized she missed. "Sleep well?" Quinn asked, offering her a tin cup of steaming coffee. "Better than I expected," she admitted, accepting the cup gratefully. "Though I dreamt of Copper Creek. The children, mostly." Quinn nodded, understanding. "It's hard to leave people behind, especially when you know they're still in danger. If we succeed, it won't be for nothing." Grace sipped the strong coffee, feeling its warmth spread through her. "How far to Tucson?" 3 days if we make good time. The terrain gets rougher from here, but it keeps us away from the main roads where we might be recognized." They broke camp efficiently, erasing all signs of their presence. As Grace mounted her horse, she realized she was developing a rhythm for this nomadic existence, a far cry from her ordered life as a schoolteacher. The thought brought a surprising smile to her lips. "Something amusing?" Quinn asked, noticing her expression. "Just thinking about how quickly life can change. A week ago, my greatest concern was preparing my students for their arithmetic examination. Regrets?" His tone was light, but Grace sensed the weight behind the question. "No," she answered honestly. "I miss my students, but I don't regret standing up for the truth, not even knowing the consequences." Quinn's eyes held hers for a moment longer than necessary. "That kind of conviction is rare, Grace Everett." The compliment warmed her more than it should have. She looked away, focusing on adjusting her reins. "We should get moving if we want to make good time." The day's journey took them through increasingly rugged country, narrow canyons giving way to high desert plateaus dotted with juniper trees and yucca plants. Quinn proved to be an excellent guide, navigating confidently through terrain that all looked the same to Grace's untrained eye. "How do you know where we're going?" she asked during a brief stop to rest the horses. "Years of practice," Quinn replied, scanning the horizon. "My father taught me to read the land like others read books. The way rock formations point, how vegetation changes with water sources, the paths animals take." He gestured to a barely perceptible trail. "See there? Deer have been using that route consistently. Animals always find the easiest path with access to water." Grace studied the landscape with new appreciation. I've spent so much of my life with books, I never learned to read the world this way. Books have their place, Quinn said with a small smile. They've preserved knowledge that would otherwise be lost. But out here, different skills keep you alive. They continued their journey, with Quinn occasionally pointing out features of the landscape or signs of wildlife. Grace absorbed these lessons eagerly, recognizing their value beyond their immediate situation. If she was to be a wanderer now, these skills might prove essential. By late afternoon, dark clouds had gathered on the horizon, and the air felt heavy with impending rain. Quinn frowned at the sky. We need to find shelter before that storm hits. Flash floods in these canyons are no joke. They pushed on at a faster pace, the horses sensing the change in weather and growing restive. Just as the first fat raindrops began to fall, Quinn spotted an overhang in a rock face large enough to shelter them and the horses. They had barely made it under cover when the skies opened, rain pouring down in sheets. The sudden downpour created instant waterfalls off the rocks around them, isolating their shelter behind a curtain of water. "Looks like we're staying put for a while," Quinn observed, removing his hat and shaking off the raindrops. "These desert storms can be intense, but they usually pass quickly." Grace dismounted, her riding skirt damp at the hem. The shelter was cramped, forcing them to stand close together as they tended to the horses. She was acutely aware of Quinn's proximity, the clean scent of him beneath the leather and dust of travel. "Here," he said, spreading his bedroll on the dry ground. "Sit. No sense in both of us standing uncomfortably." Grace sat and after a moment's hesitation patted the space beside her. "There's room for two, as you said, no sense in standing uncomfortably." Quinn hesitated, then settled beside her, careful to maintain a respectful distance. Outside, lightning flashed, followed by a crack of thunder that made the horses stamp nervously. Quinn spoke soothingly to them until they calmed. "You have a way with animals," Grace observed. "They respond to confidence and calm, people too, for that matter. Is that why you're so effective, this quiet confidence that makes people trust you?" Quinn looked at her, surprise evident in his expression. "I hadn't thought of it that way. I just try to be straightforward about what I believe." "It's refreshing," Grace admitted. In Copper Creek, everyone spoke in layers of meaning. What they said rarely aligned with what they meant or believed. "That kind of dishonesty takes energy I'd rather spend elsewhere," Quinn said simply. They lapsed into comfortable silence, watching the rain create rivers in the desert beyond their shelter. Grace found herself studying Quinn's hands, strong and capable, with calluses speaking of years of hard work, yet gentle when helping her from her horse or steadying her across difficult terrain. "Tell me more about your father," she said suddenly. "The man in the photograph." Quinn was quiet for so long that Grace feared she had overstepped, but then he began to speak, his voice soft but clear above the drumming rain. "Thomas Prescott was the most honest man I've ever known. Came west with nothing but determination and a bride who believed in him. Built our ranch from scratch, refused to cut corners or exploit others for gain." Pride and grief mingled in Quinn's voice. When the mining company moved in upstream, he was the first to notice the changes in the water. The first to speak up. Others followed his lead until the company realized he was becoming a problem. Quinn's jaw tightened. They sent men to reason with him first, offered money. When that didn't work, they made threats. My father wasn't easily intimidated. He organized the other ranchers, started gathering evidence, writing to newspapers in Denver. "Like father, like son," Grace murmured. A sad smile touched Quinn's lips. "I suppose so. They found him at the bottom of a mine shaft they were inspecting, claimed he lost his footing. But my father knew those mines like the back of his hand. He wouldn't have made such a mistake." Grace instinctively placed her hand over his. "I'm so sorry, Quinn." He turned his hand to clasp hers, the simple contact conveying more than words. "After the funeral, I found his documents. All the evidence he'd been gathering. I promised him then that I would continue his fight." "And you have," Grace said softly, with remarkable dedication. Quinn looked down at their joined hands, seeming to realize only then that they were touching, but he didn't pull away. "What about your father? You mentioned he was a professor." Grace nodded, grateful for the chance to reciprocate his openness. "Nathaniel Everett, professor of chemistry and natural philosophy. A brilliant mind, but utterly impractical about money matters. After my mother died, he retreated into his work, leaving me to manage our household from a young age. That's a heavy responsibility for a child. It taught me self-reliance," Grace said, without bitterness. "And I absorbed his love of science through osmosis, I suppose. I would help him prepare for lectures, organize his laboratory. When he came home excited about a new discovery or theory, his enthusiasm was contagious." Quinn watched her face as she spoke, noting how it softened with fondness despite the complicated relationship she described. "He must have been proud of you becoming a teacher." "I like to think so. He died before I completed my certification. Heart failure, quite sudden." Grace's voice caught slightly. "I had no idea how dire our financial situation was until after the funeral. He had borrowed extensively against his pension and our home to fund his research. So you took the position in Copper Creek out of necessity. The advertisement promised good wages and respectable accommodations for a qualified female teacher. The reality was somewhat less idyllic, but the children—" Her expression brightened. "The children made it worthwhile." The rain was beginning to slacken, the torrential downpour giving way to a steady drizzle. A shaft of late-afternoon sunlight broke through the clouds, illuminating the desert in a golden glow that transformed the wet rocks into gleaming jewels. "Beautiful," Grace breathed, momentarily distracted from their conversation. "Yes," Quinn agreed, though when she glanced at him, he was looking at her, not the landscape. Their eyes held, and Grace felt a curious fluttering sensation in her chest. In Philadelphia, she had been courted by several respectable gentlemen's sons of her father's colleagues. Mostly but none had made her feel this strange mixture of vulnerability and exhilaration. The moment was broken by one of the horses whickering softly. Quinn released her hand and stood, clearing his throat. "The storm's passing. We should check if the trails are passable." Grace felt simultaneously relieved and disappointed at the return to practicality. Of course. They ventured out from under the overhang to survey their surroundings. The desert had been transformed by the brief, but intense rainfall, dry washes now flowing with muddy water. Desert flowers already beginning to unfurl in response to the moisture. "The lower trails will be flooded," Quinn observed, pointing to a rushing stream where earlier there had been only a dry stream bed. "We'll need to take the high route, follow the ridgeline." "Is it safe?" "More exposed, but less chance of being swept away in a flash flood." He studied the sky. "We have a few hours of daylight left. Might as well make use of them." They mounted up and continued their journey, the horses picking their way carefully over the rain-slick rocks. Grace found herself watching Quinn with new awareness, noting the easy grace with which he rode, the alert set of his shoulders, the way he instinctively positioned himself to shield her from potential dangers. By sunset, they had reached a high plateau offering a panoramic view of the desert below. Quinn declared it a suitable campsite, and they went about their now familiar routine of making camp. As Grace spread out their bedrolls, she realized they had placed them closer together than on previous nights, whether by accident or design. She couldn't say, and didn't examine too closely. The night sky above the desert was a tapestry of stars more brilliant than any Grace had seen in the east. After their simple dinner, she lay back to gaze upward, marveling at the vastness. "The stars seem closer here," she remarked, "almost within reach." Quinn stretched out beside her, hands behind his head. "Less competing light, and the air is clearer, especially after the rain. Do you know the constellations?" "Some. My mother taught me the common ones," he pointed upward. "There's the North Star and the Big Dipper." "The Little Dipper is harder to see." Grace followed his pointing finger, tracing the patterns among the stars. In ancient times, people believed the stars guided their fates. What do you believe? Quinn asked, turning his head to look at her. I believe in what I can observe and verify, Grace replied. The scientific method my father taught me. Hypothesize, experiment, analyze results, draw conclusions. And what conclusions have you drawn about our current situation? She considered the question seriously. That sometimes the right path isn't the easy one. That speaking truth has consequences, but remaining silent has worse ones. That unexpected allies can appear when you need them most. Her voice softened. That perhaps fate, if it exists, occasionally gets things right. Quinn's expression was unreadable in the starlight. I've never been a man for philosophy, just simple truths, right and wrong, justice and injustice. There's nothing simple about justice, Grace countered gently. If it were simple, it wouldn't be so rare. Fair point. Quinn smiled, the expression transforming his serious face. You have a way of cutting to the heart of things, Grace Everett. Occupational hazard of teaching, she replied lightly. Children have no patience for obfuscation. They fell silent, the comfortable kind that needs no filling. Around them, the desert night pulsed with life, the distant howl of coyotes, the rustle of small creatures in the brush, the whisper of a gentle breeze through the juniper trees. 2 more days to Tucson, Quinn said eventually. Then we'll see if all this was worth it. It's already worth it, Grace said with quiet certainty. Whether we succeed in bringing down the mining company or not, we've done what was right. That has to count for something. Quinn reached over and took her hand, his calloused palm warm against hers. Your optimism is either your greatest strength or your most dangerous weakness. I haven't decided which. Perhaps both, Grace admitted, not pulling her hand away. They stayed that way for a long while, hands joined beneath the vast starry sky, each lost in their own thoughts yet somehow together in the silence. The next day brought new challenges as they navigated the aftermath of the storm. Washes that had been dry now flowed with muddy water, forcing detours and careful crossings. By midday, they had made less progress than Quinn had hoped, but Grace marveled at how smoothly they worked together, anticipating each other's needs with minimal communication. We make a good team, she observed during a brief rest to water the horses at a rain-filled depression in the rocks. We do, Quinn agreed, his eyes crinkling at the corners when he smiled. Though I suspect you'd be formidable with any partner, or on your own for that matter. A compliment, Mr. Prescott? Grace teased, enjoying the momentary lightness between them. Merely an observation, Miss Everett, he replied with equal playfulness. The afternoon found them descending from the high country toward more populated areas. Quinn grew more vigilant as they approached a small settlement, insisting they skirt widely around it rather than risk being seen. The mining company has eyes everywhere, he explained. Word travels fast in these parts. Do you really think they'd pursue us this far? Grace asked, surprised by the level of caution. You represent a serious threat to them, Grace. Your evidence, combined with my father's documentation, could cost them millions in damages and legal penalties. Quinn's expression darkened. They've killed for less. The stark reminder of the stakes sobered Grace. She had been so caught up in the adventure of their journey, in the growing connection between them, that she had momentarily forgotten the danger. As twilight approached, they made camp in a sheltered grove of cottonwood trees near a small stream. The area showed signs of previous travelers, a rough fire pit ringed with stones, a log positioned as a bench but had clearly been abandoned for some time. We should reach Tucson by tomorrow evening, Quinn said as they prepared their meal. Judge Garrett has a home on the outskirts of town. We'll go directly there rather than risk being seen in the city. Grace nodded, focused on slicing dried apples to add to their dwindling supplies. What happens after we deliver the evidence? Do we stay in Tucson to testify? That depends on Judge Garrett's assessment. If he believes we have enough for an immediate injunction against the mining company, we might need to appear before the territorial court. Quinn hesitated. But Grace, you should consider what comes after. You can't return to Copper Creek not until this is resolved, and even then. I know, she said quietly. I've been thinking about that. Perhaps I can find a teaching position in Tucson or another town far from Copper Creek's influence. Quinn seemed about to say more when a twig snapped in the darkness beyond their campfire. In one fluid motion, he was on his feet, revolver drawn. "Who's there?" he called, positioning himself between Grace and the potential threat. "Easy, cowboy," came a gruff voice. "Just a fellow traveler looking for a spot to rest." A man emerged from the shadows, hands raised to show he was unarmed. He was middle-aged with a weather-beaten face and the dusty clothes of a prospector. "Name's Silas Jones," the man said. "Been panning upstream, saw your fire and thought I might share it if you're amenable." Quinn lowered his gun slightly but remained wary. "What's your business in these parts, Mr. Jones? Just trying to scratch out a living, same as most," the man replied easily. "Gold's scarce these days, but a man can still find enough color to keep body and soul together." "You folks headed to Tucson?" "Perhaps," Quinn said noncommittally. "You're welcome to share our fire, but we've little food to spare." "Got my own provisions, such as they are," Jones said, shrugging off a worn pack. "I'm obliged for the company, though. Gets lonely out here." Grace watched the exchange with interest, noting how Quinn remained alert despite his outward hospitality. As Jones settled by the fire and began preparing his own simple meal, she caught Quinn's eye, raising a questioning eyebrow. He gave a slight shake of his head, a warning to reveal nothing about their mission. The conversation over dinner remained carefully neutral: weather, terrain, general news of the territory. Jones seemed particularly interested in their horses, commenting on their quality and asking where they had acquired them. "Fine animals," he remarked, chewing on a strip of jerky. "Don't often see such quality mounts with ordinary travelers. You must have paid a pretty penny for them." "They serve our needs," Quinn replied, giving nothing away. "What news from Tucson, Mr. Jones?" "Been there recently, about a week back," Jones said. "Place is growing fast. Talk of the railroad coming through has everyone excited." He glanced at Grace. "Unusual to see a lady traveling these rough parts. You visiting family in Tucson, madam?" Before Grace could answer, Quinn interjected smoothly. "My sister is joining her husband there. I'm escorting her for safety." The lie came so easily that Grace almost believed it herself. She nodded in agreement, keeping her expression neutral. "He's stationed with the army," she added, building on the fabrication. "I've been quite anxious to rejoin him." Jones seemed satisfied with this explanation, and the conversation turned to other matters. As the evening wore on, Grace found herself growing increasingly uneasy about their unexpected companion. Something in his manner struck her as false, though she couldn't pinpoint exactly why. When it came time to sleep, Quinn insisted on taking the first watch. "Old habit," he explained to Jones. "I don't rest easy in unfamiliar company." "Wise precaution," the man agreed readily. "These parts can be dangerous." Grace settled onto her bedroll, pretending to sleep while keeping her senses alert. Through slitted eyes, she watched Jones lay out his own bedding and turn his back to the fire. For a long while, nothing happened. Quinn sat motionless, staring into the flames, occasionally adding small branches to maintain the light. Just when Grace was beginning to think her suspicions were unfounded, she saw Jones shift slightly, his hand moving toward his boot. In the flickering firelight, she glimpsed metal, a small pistol concealed in an ankle holster, her heart hammering. Grace tried to catch Quinn's attention without alerting Jones. But before she could move, Quinn spoke. "I wouldn't if I were you," he said conversationally, his revolver already trained on Jones. "Hands where I can see them, away from that boot." Jones froze, then slowly raised his hands. "Just reaching for my tobacco pouch," he claimed, but the lie was transparent. "Who sent you?" Quinn demanded, his voice hard. "The mining company." Jones's demeanor changed entirely, his affable manner replaced by cold calculation. "You're making a mistake, Prescott. The company just wants the woman's evidence. Give it up and you can ride away free and clear." Grace sat up, all pretense of sleep abandoned. "How do you know his name?" "They know all about both of you," Jones said with a mirthless smile. "Grace Everett, troublemaking schoolteacher. Quinn Prescott, vengeful son with a grudge. You're not as anonymous as you think." Quinn's expression remained impassive, but Grace could see the tension in his shoulders. "And if we refuse to hand over the evidence, then things get unpleasant." Jones's gaze shifted to Grace. "For both of you." In one swift movement, Quinn was across the campfire, disarming Jones and binding his hands with a length of rope from their supplies. The prospector cursed but offered no physical resistance, seemingly aware he was outmatched. "We need to move," Quinn told Grace urgently. "If he found us, others might be close behind." They hurriedly packed their belongings, leaving Jones bound but not gagged. "Someone will find you eventually," Quinn told him, "or you can work yourself free. Either way, we'll be long gone." They rode through the night, pushing the horses harder than before. Grace's mind raced with questions and fears. How did they find us? How did they know our names? "The mining company has resources we can only imagine," Quinn replied grimly. "Money buys loyalty, information, and betrayal." "Do you think the Gundersons?" "No," Quinn said firmly. "Harold and Ingrid are good people, but word travels and not everyone who passes through their trading post is trustworthy. All it takes is one person recognizing our descriptions." They continued riding until dawn broke over the desert, stopping only briefly to rest the horses before pressing on. The landscape gradually changed as they approached Tucson. More settlements, cultivated fields, signs of civilization. By late afternoon, exhaustion dragged at them both, but the outskirts of Tucson were finally visible in the distance. Quinn led them on a circuitous route, avoiding the main roads and approaching from the east. "Judge Garrett's home is beyond those hills," Quinn said, pointing to a rise crowned with mesquite trees. "We're almost there, Grace." The relief in his voice matched her own feelings. After days of travel, danger, and uncertainty, they were finally reaching their destination. Yet mixed with the relief was a curious sense of regret. Once they delivered their evidence, their journey together would end. The thought left an unexpected hollowness in Grace's chest. Judge William Garrett's home proved to be a modest adobe house set back from the road, surrounded by a well-tended garden that seemed miraculous in the desert setting. As they approached the gate, an elderly man with a shock of white hair appeared on the porch, squinting at them suspiciously. "Who goes there?" he called, a shotgun visible in his hands. "Quinn Prescott," Quinn called back. "We corresponded about the Copper Creek mining case. This is Grace Everett, the schoolteacher I mentioned." The judge lowered his shotgun, recognition dawning on his weathered face. "Prescott. Didn't expect you for another week at least. Come in, quickly now." They dismounted wearily, leading their horses through the gate. Judge Garrett ushered them inside with surprising urgency, glancing nervously at the road behind them. "You're lucky to be alive," he said without preamble once they were seated in his study. "Word reached me yesterday that the mining company has put a bounty on both your heads, $500 apiece, dead or alive." Grace gasped, the reality of their danger finally hitting home. "They can't do that. That's murder for hire." "Of course they can't, legally speaking," the judge said grimly. "But legality rarely concerns them. The bounty is being spread by word of mouth, not official notices. Plausible deniability." Quinn looked unsurprised, merely tired. "We were ambushed last night by one of their men, managed to get away, but they're clearly tracking us." "Then we have no time to waste," Judge Garrett said, reaching for the leather satchel Quinn had placed on his desk. "Show me what you've brought." For the next several hours, they laid out their evidence. Grace's meticulous records, water samples, medical documentation, alongside Quinn's collection of testimonies and his father's original research. Judge Garrett pored over the materials with the focused attention of a man accustomed to evaluating evidence, occasionally asking sharp questions or requesting clarification. As night fell, the judge's housekeeper brought them a simple but hearty meal, which Grace and Quinn devoured gratefully after days of trail rations. Finally, Judge Garrett sat back in his chair, removing his spectacles to rub his tired eyes. "This is more than enough for an injunction," he announced. "Possibly even criminal charges against several company executives. I'll prepare the paperwork tonight and file it first thing in the morning with the territorial court." Relief washed over Grace, so profound she felt momentarily lightheaded. "They'll be stopped. The poisoning will end. The court will order an immediate cessation of all mining activities pending investigation," the judge confirmed. "And with evidence this compelling, I expect permanent restrictions to follow." Quinn's expression was a complex mixture of satisfaction and lingering grief. "My father would be pleased," he said quietly. Judge Garrett nodded understanding. Thomas was a good man. His documentation was the foundation for this case. Without his initial work, we might never have connected the patterns across different territories. "What happens now?" Grace asked, the practical question that had been hovering at the edges of her mind. "For us, I mean." "You'll both need to testify once the case goes to trial," the judge replied. "That could be weeks or months from now. In the meantime," he hesitated. "In the meantime, you should stay hidden. The mining company won't take this lying down. Even with an injunction, they'll be dangerous until they're formally convicted." "I can't hide forever," Grace protested. "I need to work to earn a living. And I have unfinished business," Quinn added. "Other mining operations to investigate." Judge Garrett studied them thoughtfully. "I have a suggestion, though you're free to refuse. I own a small ranch about 50 miles south of here, near the border. It's isolated, self-sufficient, currently managed by a foreman and his wife. You could stay there until the trial, help with the running of the place. It would provide safety, purpose, and compensation for your time." Grace glanced at Quinn, finding him already looking at her. The prospect of continuing in his company sent an unexpected thrill through her, though she tried to keep her expression neutral. "It's a generous offer," Quinn said carefully. "Grace, what do you think?" "I think it sounds practical," she replied, matching his tone, "though I know little about ranching. Maria, the foreman's wife, has been asking for help with the children's education," Judge Garrett mentioned. 5 ranch children with no formal schooling. Would that interest you, Miss Everett?" Grace couldn't help the smile that spread across her face. "Very much so, Your Honor." "Then it's settled," the judge declared. "You'll leave at first light tomorrow. I'll provide a letter for Pedro, my foreman, explaining the situation. The ranch is registered under my late wife's maiden name, so the connection to me isn't immediately obvious. You should be safe there." As Judge Garrett showed them to separate guest rooms, Grace found herself filled with conflicting emotions: relief at their success, anxiety about the continuing danger, and a strange anticipation about the months ahead at the remote ranch. With Quinn. Her room was small but comfortable, with a real bed that felt luxurious after nights on the hard ground. She washed in the basin provided, changed into a clean nightgown offered by the housekeeper, and sat on the edge of the bed, suddenly too tired to think clearly yet too wired to sleep. A soft knock at her door startled her. "Yes," she called, pulling a shawl around her shoulders. "It's Quinn," came the low response. "May I speak with you for a moment?" Grace hesitated, aware of the impropriety, then decided conventional rules hardly applied to their unconventional situation. "Come in." Quinn entered, still fully dressed though he had removed his hat and gun belt. He remained near the doorway, maintaining a respectful distance. "I wanted to make sure you're comfortable with the judge's plan," he said without preamble. "If you'd prefer other arrangements, we could discuss alternatives." "The ranch seems sensible," Grace replied. "Unless you have objections." Quinn shook his head. "None, I just—" He paused, seeming uncharacteristically uncertain. "These past few days have been extraordinary circumstances. I wouldn't want you to feel obligated to continue in my company once the immediate danger has passed." Grace studied him, realizing what he was offering an honorable exit if she wished to take it. The gesture touched her deeply. "Quinn," she said softly, If I've learned anything from this journey, it's that extraordinary circumstances often reveal essential truths. And the truth is, I've come to value your company greatly. I'm not looking for an exit." Something in his expression shifted, tension giving way to a carefully contained hope. "Good," he said simply. "Because I've grown rather accustomed to having you around, Grace Everett, even when I ask too many questions," she teased gently, "especially then." A smile tugged at his lips. "Your questions make me think. Few people have managed that." The air between them seemed charged with unspoken possibilities. Quinn took a step forward, then stopped himself, ever mindful of propriety. "We should get some rest," he said. "Tomorrow begins a new chapter." "Yes," Grace agreed. "A chapter we'll write together, it seems." Quinn's eyes held hers for a long moment. "Good night, Grace." "Good night, Quinn." After he left, Grace lay awake for some time, reflecting on the extraordinary turn her life had taken. A week ago, she had been banished from Copper Creek, her reputation in tatters, her future uncertain. Now she stood on the precipice of justice for the townspeople who had turned against her, with a new purpose awaiting her, and a man whose quiet strength and unwavering principles had become unexpectedly dear to her. The realization didn't shock her as much as it might have once. In the crucible of their journey, something profound had formed between them, a connection based on shared values, mutual respect, and growing affection. As she drifted towards sleep, Grace thought of Quinn's words from their first meeting. "Your truth is my compass." In finding each other, perhaps they had both found their true north. The journey to Judge Garrett's ranch the following day was tense but uneventful. They traveled with an escort of 2 trusted deputies, taking back roads and keeping a vigilant watch. Grace found herself stealing glances at Quinn throughout the journey, noting how the morning light caught the silver streaks at his temples, how his eyes constantly scanned their surroundings, protective and alert. Pedro and Maria Rodriguez welcomed them with the warm hospitality of people accustomed to taking in strangers. The ranch was modest, but well-maintained, a main house, bunkhouse for the handful of ranch hands, barns and corrals for the cattle and horses that comprised the judge's small herd. "The children will be overjoyed to have a teacher," Maria told Grace as she showed her to a small but private room off the main house. "They are bright but wild, with no schooling but what I can manage between my other duties." "I look forward to meeting them," Grace replied sincerely. "How many are there?" "5 in total. Our 3, Lucia, Miguel, and Sofia, plus the children of 2 of our ranch hands. They range from 6 to 12 years old." Meanwhile, Pedro was showing Quinn around the ranch operations. "Judge Garrett said you have experience with cattle," the foreman remarked. "Grew up on a ranch in Colorado," Quinn confirmed. "I can pull my weight." "Good. We're short-handed with the fall roundup coming. Another experienced rider will be welcome." By sunset, Grace and Quinn had settled into their new temporary home, the threat of the mining company momentarily distant. As they sat on the porch after dinner, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky, Grace felt a peace she hadn't experienced in years. "It feels strange," she confessed, "to be safe, to have a purpose again." Quinn nodded, understanding, "Like coming up for air after being underwater too long." "Exactly," she glanced at him. "Do you think you can be content here, until the trial at least?" He considered the question seriously. "I've been traveling for so long, pursuing justice for my father, that I've almost forgotten what it's like to stay in one place. It might be a welcome change." His eyes met hers, especially with good company. The weeks that followed established a rhythm to their days. Grace converted a corner of the main house into a classroom, working with the ranch children each morning. Their enthusiasm for learning reminded her why she had become a teacher in the first place. Their minds unsullied by the prejudices and politics that had poisoned Copper Creek. Quinn integrated seamlessly into the ranch operations, riding out with the other men at dawn and returning dusty and tired but visibly satisfied with the physical labor. In the evenings, they would often sit together on the porch, sharing the events of their days or simply enjoying the companionable silence. Occasionally, riders would arrive with news and correspondence from Judge Garrett. The case against Copper Creek Mining was proceeding, with the injunction granted, and the company's operations halted pending investigation. Other mining towns had begun to come forward with similar complaints, suggesting a pattern of environmental negligence that strengthened their case further. As autumn deepened toward winter, the routine of ranch life brought Grace and Quinn closer, their initial connection deepening into something neither had expected, but both increasingly valued. They worked side by side helping with the harvest, Quinn teaching Grace to ride better, Grace sharing books from the judge's small library. It was on a crisp November evening, with the first hint of winter in the air, that Quinn found Grace alone by the corral, watching the sunset paint the western sky in vivid oranges and reds. "Penny for your thoughts," he said, coming to stand beside her. Grace smiled. "I was thinking about Copper Creek, wondering if the water runs clear now, if the children are healthier." According to the judge's last letter, the company has been ordered to implement extensive cleanup measures. "Things are improving," Quinn hesitated. "Do you miss it, teaching there?" "I miss the children," Grace admitted, "but not the place itself. It never felt like home." She turned to face him fully. "This does, though. Despite everything, or perhaps because of it, I feel more at home here than I have anywhere since leaving Philadelphia." Quinn's expression softened. "I know what you mean. For years, I've been a man with a mission but no home, just the trail and the next town, the next piece of evidence." "And now," Grace asked quietly, "now I find myself thinking about what comes after the mission, after the trial." His voice dropped lower. "About building something permanent instead of just seeking justice for what was lost." The meaning behind his words hung in the air between them, clear but unspoken. Grace took a deep breath, gathering her courage. "Quinn, I miss Grace." A child's voice interrupted the moment as Lucia, Maria's eldest daughter, came running toward them. "Mama says dinner is ready and to come before it gets cold." The moment broke, but the look that passed between them held a promise of continuation. "We'll be right there," Grace called to the girl, who raced back to the house with the boundless energy of childhood. "Later," Quinn said softly. "We'll talk later." Dinner was a lively affair as always. The ranch hands shared stories and jokes. The children chattered about their day's adventures, and Maria's cooking reminded Grace of family meals from her childhood. Through it all, she was acutely aware of Quinn across the table, his quiet presence a counterpoint to the boisterous gathering. After dinner, when the dishes were cleared and the children sent to bed, Grace found herself drawn back to the porch. The night was clear and cold, the stars brilliant in the black vault of sky. She wrapped her shawl tighter around her shoulders but made no move to go inside. She wasn't surprised when Quinn joined her, a woolen blanket in his hands. "You'll catch your death out here," he chided gently, draping it around her shoulders. "Worth it for this view," Grace replied, nodding toward the star-strewn sky. "We never saw stars like this in Philadelphia." Too much coal smoke and gas lamps. "One of the compensations of frontier life," Quinn agreed. "The vastness makes a man feel small, but in a good way, puts things in perspective." They stood in comfortable silence for a while, shoulders nearly touching. Finally, Quinn spoke, his voice thoughtful. "I've been thinking about what happens after the trial." "So have I," Grace admitted. "Judge Garrett mentioned in his last letter that the territorial governor is establishing a commission to oversee mining operations, ensure they comply with new safety regulations." Quinn turned to face her. "He suggested I might have a place on it, given my experience and personal investment in the issue." "That sounds perfect for you," Grace said warmly. "Would you accept?" "I'm considering it. It would mean staying in Arizona territory, basing myself in Tucson." He paused. The judge also mentioned that Tucson is establishing a proper school system. They're looking for experienced teachers. Grace's heart quickened. "Are they?" "Apparently so." Quinn took a deep breath. Grace, I'm not a man given to flowery speeches or grand declarations, but these months with you, they've changed me, changed how I see the future. How so? She asked, barely above a whisper. Before, the future was just more of the same, more trails, more towns, more evidence gathering, a mission with no end. His hand found hers in the darkness. Now I find myself wanting something different, a home, a purpose beyond vengeance, a partner. Grace's breath caught. Quinn, let me finish while I have the courage, he said with a small smile. I know it's not conventional, we met under extraordinary circumstances. But I believe what's grown between us is real and true. When this is all over, when justice has been served, I want to build a life, with you if you'll have me. The words were simple, direct, utterly Quinn. Grace felt tears spring to her eyes, not of sorrow but of unexpected joy. I would like that very much, she said, her voice steady despite the emotion welling within her. A life built on truth and justice seems an excellent foundation. Quinn's hand tightened around hers. Is that a yes, Grace Everett? It's a yes, Quinn Prescott. She smiled up at him, tears and starlight mingling in her eyes. Your truth has indeed been my compass, guiding me to a place I never expected to find. He drew her closer, one hand gently cupping her face. May I? He asked, his voice husky. In answer, Grace rose on tiptoes and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was gentle at first, then deepened with all the emotion that had been building between them over their shared journey. When they finally parted, both were breathless. I've wanted to do that since you stood up to me that first night in the desert, Quinn confessed, his forehead resting against hers. Even when I was dusty and disheveled and likely arguing with you, Grace asked, laughing softly, especially then. Your passion for truth, your courage in the face of injustice. How could I not fall in love with that? With you, the word love hung in the air between them, spoken aloud for the first time. Grace felt it settle into her heart, familiar and right, as though it had been there all along, waiting to be acknowledged. I love you too, she said simply. It crept up on me so gradually I hardly noticed until it was already an irrefutable fact. Quinn laughed. Always the scientist, with your irrefutable facts. Some truths require no experimentation to verify, Grace replied, drawing him down for another kiss. 3 months later, with spring beginning to soften the desert landscape, Grace stood beside Quinn in Judge Garrett's parlor in Tucson. The trial against Copper Creek Mining had concluded with a decisive victory, the company fined heavily. Its operations permanently restricted. Criminal charges filed against 2 executives who had ordered the intimidation of witnesses. By the power vested in me by the territory of Arizona, Judge Garrett concluded, closing his Bible with a satisfied smile, I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride, Mr. Prescott. As Quinn's lips met hers, Grace felt the journey come full circle. From that night of banishment on a desert road to this moment of new beginnings, they had traveled a path neither could have anticipated, but both now treasured. The small gathering applauded the Rodriguezes, several ranch hands who had become friends, Quinn's brother who had traveled from Colorado, and a few of the children from Copper Creek, whose parents had brought them to thank their former teacher for saving their health and possibly their lives. Among the gifts presented to the newlyweds was a silver compass, engraved with the words that had brought them together. Your truth is my compass. Rather fitting, don't you think? Quinn murmured as they danced later that evening, the compass pinned to Grace's wedding dress. Perfect, she agreed, her head resting against his shoulder, though I suspect we'll need more than a compass for the journey ahead. We have everything we need, Quinn assured her. Courage, conviction, and each other, the rest we'll figure out along the way. As twilight settled over Tucson, painting the desert in shades of purple and gold, Grace knew he was right. Their story had begun with a banishment, but it would continue with a homecoming to the life they would build together, founded on the bedrock of shared truth and unwavering commitment to justice. And in the years that followed, as Quinn's work on the mining commission brought positive change throughout the territory, as Grace's school flourished and eventually grew into Tucson's first proper academy. As their family expanded to include 2 children who inherited their parents' passion for truth and justice, the compass remained a treasured symbol of their beginning. For in a world of shifting sands and uncertain footing, they had found in each other the truest guide, a love born of shared purpose, forged in adversity, and destined to leave the territory better than they found it.